All of the ancients, whether you're talking about Judeo-Christian values or Greek philosophers, all of them believed that happiness had to do with the sense of moral purpose. The tension between Jerusalem and Athens, the interplay, that is what built the West. That is what built the greatest civilization in the history of mankind.
So I understand the dictionary definition of atheism is just somebody...
There is no God, yeah.
Right. But I think it's a little bit deeper than that. And out of the many atheists that I've talked to, I've never met a single one that says that they have empirical knowledge that God doesn't exist. And I feel like that's the argument that you're making. I could be wrong. I don't mean to misquote.
Well, to me, that was the difference definitionally between agnostics and atheists.
Right.
Right. So if you want to say that, if we want to talk about agnosticism and say maybe God exists, maybe doesn't, but I don't have evidence of it, so I don't believe. That's borderline agnostic atheist. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, to my central argument, whether you're an agnostic or an atheist, the bottom line is that without the belief that there is a purpose to the universe, without a belief that there is a purpose to your life, without a belief that you have the capacity to make individual choices, it's very difficult to build a civilization. By difficult, I mean impossible.
Okay. So on that note of free will, which is what you're talking about, right?
Yes. I think free will, by the way, is the single most important principle undergirding any civilization.
Okay, absolutely. And to be totally honest with you, I'm torn on the subject myself.
Yeah.
And which is why...
But in your own life, you're not, because you chose to come here and you chose to ask me a question, right?
It's complicated.
I would hate to think that the universe randomly imbued you with a set of atoms that showed up here randomly to ask me a question. That would be very disappointing to me. There is a baseline level of hatred, really, for Christians on the cultural left. It's the same sort of thing that they've used with regard to Jack Phillips over at Masterpiece Cake Shop. Really, he hates gay people. It's not that he's a Christian who believes he has to abide by his religious standards. It's that he secretly hates gay people and trans people, and he's just using religion as a cover. They say the same sort of thing about Mike Pence. Truly, there's a tyrannical tendency among religious people, and then they just use Jesus or the Bible as an excuse. Now, of course, none of that is true. The only theocrats, the only people who actually want to rule from above by instituting their moral preferences on society from the top down are the folks on the left who actually want to invade rights on a regular basis and force people to do things that they don't want to do. It's a lot more common on the left than it is on the right. So they're actually using their own theocratic tendencies toward government, which a lot of folks on the radical left see as a quasi-godlike figure. They're using that own theocratic tendency and then they're projecting it onto people like Mike Pence. It's really quite disgusting. This is the part where I become rather perturbed when people suggest that the evils of Western civilization are unique while the goods are universal. This is the part of the argument I've never understood from people who are highly critical of Western civilization. They point out correctly that Western civilization has been responsible for an immense amount of evil. There's tremendous racism endemic in Western civilization. There's religious persecution, obviously. There's genocide against, my extended family. I mean, this sort of stuff was part of Western civilization. But here's what makes Western civilization different. All of those things exist in virtually every other culture throughout the vast span of time. The good stuff is the part that we don't have a really good explanation for. The good stuff is the part where we have to say, okay, well, what drove all the good stuff to happen? Because
of it, for that matter, because
correct.
It's damn unlikely.
Secular values that we all hold dear, things like freedom of speech and free markets, are actually rooted in Judeo-Christian values about the fact that we are all made in God's image, that we are individuals with creative capacity, that the universe is an understandable place where we ought to be able to use reason. These are religious assumptions. Okay? These are not assumptions you can make if you are a scientific materialist. Those are religiously based. But making those assumptions, now you have to make a secular argument for why public policy ought to prevail along some lines or other lines. But the assumptions that you make from the outset are very rarely based in simple evidence. Assumptions that you make politically or values-wise are generally based in a religious underpinning, which is why when I debated Sam Harrison, I asked him, why do you think our values are so similar, even though you're a militant atheist and I'm an Orthodox Jew? The answer is because we grew up in a Judeo-Christian society with 3,000 years of common history 10 miles from each other.
Touched on it a little bit towards the end of your lecture, but if you could describe more, I guess elaborate more on what you mean by decency and these fundamental values, especially in light of the statements that you just made in response to the question, not this last question, but before this. Recognizing the fluidity of culture and cultural values and the existence of cultures that don't necessarily share the same values. I mean, these are high-stakes questions.
Not to go all religious on you, but leaving aside the religious aspects of the Ten Commandments, I think that would be a pretty good place to start with basic decency. I think that basic values that we in Western civilization tend to share, things like you don't get to kill people, you don't get to kidnap people. I think that values that have developed later, anti-slavery values, for example, that are a later breaking development from Western civilization, but have roots in Judeo-Christian civilization. Those are values that are fundamental values of decency. The ones embodied in the Constitution seem to me to be good values. Like, I don't get to harm you because I don't get to use the government as a club against you because I disagree with what you say. I don't get to use the government as a club against you because I disagree with your religious practice that doesn't infringe on me. I have sort of a John Stuart Mill view of interpersonal decency when it comes to governmental intervention, and that is I get to wave my fist around as much as I want so long as it doesn't hit your face. Now, where I think that some people get dicey about this, I don't want to lead you here, but I think this is where some people get dicey about this idea, is they say, okay, well, what about the things where I'm waving my fist around and I'm not formally hitting you in the face, but you're getting me upset. So, for example, if you have a private business and the private business decides to discriminate against Jews, right, or decides to discriminate against blacks or against gays, right, what would you do about that? So I don't think the government has any business telling private businesses what to do, because I think that capitalism is colorblind, and that means that if somebody discriminates against Jews or blacks or gays, they'll go out of business. There'll be other people who offer their services. I think it's important to recognize that tension is important. And I think that when we try to remove the sources of tension by either removing reason on the one hand or religion on the other hand, you end up in a bad place. But that's not to say that the tension is constant or that it is constantly at the same pitch. And think of a rubber band that is sort of, shrinking and growing and shrinking and growing. There may be an ideal point of tension, and that ideal point of tension builds a bridge that is strong enough to allow us to build a civilization on top of it. The point is that tension can be very easily lost by weakening either religion too much or reason too much. If you imagine civilization as a suspension bridge, if you start to weaken one side of the suspension bridge, either side, then it can collapse. And if you strengthen one side too much, then the bridge is going to pull apart and the entire structure is going to fall. Civilization, in other words, is delicate. And the delicacy of civilization requires us to be in constant maintenance of both our reason and our religious convictions about the nature of the world and human life. If you read the Declaration of Independence, everything that I am saying is deeply embedded in the words of the Declaration of Independence. The notion of all human beings having equal rights and independence sprang originally from that biblical Judeo-Christian notion of man being made in God's image, admixed with the Greek tradition of individual reason, passed down generation after generation, transmuted over time into the understanding that not only are human beings made in God's image with will and reason, but we have a right, we have a natural right, we have a liberty to exercise that reason, because otherwise we can't fulfill what God wants of us. The founders, despite the common misperception that they were a bunch of atheist deists, they knew all of this stuff. Washington famously said, "The foundation of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality. There exists in the economy and course of nature an indissoluble union between virtue and happiness." Right? America is the place where all of this came together. Those are the principles in the Declaration of Independence. Those are the principles in the Constitution. Have we been perfect in our application of those principles? Of course not. But the goal of America is to live up to those principles, not to discard those principles. And here's where we get into the difficulties with today. Because on the one hand, there are a lot of folks who have decided they want to discard Jerusalem, and on the other, you have a bunch of folks who have decided they want to discard Athens. You have a bunch of folks who believe that religion is bad, religion is terrible, religion is repressive, religion is tyrannical. We have to force religious people to violate their own precepts in their business practices. If kids are taught religion, then they are being perverted against the common good. But here's the truth. Without religion, there is no free will and there is no reason. Okay, you cannot make the argument that human beings are capable of making freely willed decisions in a universe where human beings are a set of firing neurons and a ball of meat wandering through the universe. Being a secular materialist does not give you freedom. It chains you to your biology. We live in the most prosperous time in human history, a time when a baby born can expect to live past the year 80. A time when virtually no one is living in starvation conditions in the West, when virtually everybody can expect to have a long, healthy life, when racial tolerance is at an all-time high, when freedom is at an all-time high. So how did things get so good? How did we end up here? Because 2 centuries ago, everybody was dying in nasty, brutish, and short fashion. So what exactly changed is question number one. And number two is, why are we so angry at each other amidst the most glorious conditions ever lived in by any human beings at any time? And the answer is, we have to investigate the roots of our civilization. And those foundations, I contend, in the right side of history, lie, one, in Judeo-Christian ethics, and two, lie in Greek teleology, the idea that we can apply reason to the universe and come up with good moral answers and scientific answers to the conditions that surround us. So that combination, the push and pull between human reason and divine revelation, that push and pull created the West. We have tried forcibly, in many cases, to undermine both of those bases for Western civilization. Then we're surprised when we return to the chaos that preceded them. The Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that God created an ordered universe and that we have an obligation to try to make the world better. This offers us purpose and suggests that history moves forward. Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that every human is created in the image of God. That is, each individual's life is infinitely valuable. This seems self-evident to us now, but only because we have lived with this belief for so long. The far more natural belief is that the strong should subjugate the weak, which is precisely what people did in nearly every society in all of history. Only by recognizing the divine in others did we ever move beyond this amoral thinking toward the concern for human rights, democracy, and free enterprise that characterized the West. But Judeo-Christian religion alone didn't build our modern civilization. We also required Greek reason to teach us objective observation, that man has the capacity to search beyond revelation for answers. Greek reason brought us the notion of the natural law, the idea that we could discover the natural purpose, the telos, of everything in creation by looking to its character. Human beings were created with the unique capacity to reason. Therefore, our telos was to reason. The founding fathers took the best of the European Enlightenment, with its roots in Greek thought, and the best of Judeo-Christian practice, with its roots in the Bible, and melded them into a whole new political philosophy. Without Judeo-Christian values, we fall into scientific materialism, the belief that physical matter is the only reality, and therefore also fall into nihilism, the belief that life has no meaning, that we're merely stellar dust in a cold universe. Without Greek reason, we fall into fanaticism, the belief that fundamentalist adherence to unprovable principles represents the only path toward meaning. The Soviet Union, Communist China, and other socialist tyrannies rejected faith and murdered 100 million people in the 20th century. Much of the modern Muslim world has embraced faith, but rejected reason. It's noteworthy that when the Muslim world did embrace Greek reason from the 8th to the 14th centuries, it was a leading center for scientific advancement. So again, we need both Jerusalem and Athens, revelation and reason. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative media outlets in the country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.